I'm Shelby, and this is Filmish Chats. Hello and welcome. I'm Shelby Cook, head curator and editor-in-chief at Film East. And today I'm joined with Will Schofield to discuss Wong Kar-wai's brilliant works, Chungking Express and Fallen Angels. This episode is part of Film East Online, a space for free online content in varying media to educate, inform, and inspire all things cinema. Film East is a multi-award winning global film organization based in the east of England and the east coast of the US. Before we get into the episode, we have a very special announcement. Film East is headed to Canada. I will be attending the 50th edition of the Toronto International Film Festival as official press on behalf of Film East. Throughout the festival, we will be sharing our reviews of select films over on our Instagram, as well as providing daily updates about interviews, talks, and more. Leave us a comment and let us know what films you want us to cover, and we'll do our best to get you the reviews that you want. Make sure you're following us on Instagram at films_east to get all of the TIFF content. A pivotal figure in the new wave of Hong Kong cinema, Wong Kar-wai is considered a contemporary auteur and one of the greatest filmmakers of the past 30 years. His films are characterized by vivid cinematography with bold, saturated colors, non-linear narratives, and atmospheric music. For today's discussion, we will be talking about the 1994 and 1995 films Chungking Express and Fallen Angels. Initially planned to be one complete film, these two works explore similar themes, but through vastly different landscapes. Set in the Chungking mansions of Hong Kong, these films depict contemporary life in pre-handover Hong Kong during the day and the night. With innovative cinematic techniques, radical imagery, and captivating coloring, Chungking Express and Fallen Angels tackle the duality of modern life, love, and connection, backdropped by a city on the brink of complete change. Here's Film East chatting about Wong Kar-wai's Chungking Express and Fallen Angels. I feel like we start every episode with, okay, yeah, right. So that's how every single one of them starts. Um, okay, so we're obviously talking about Wong Kar-wai in this recording. Have you seen any of his films before you started this recording, Will?
It's quite funny that when you suggested this, I think you suggested it a while ago when we finished our
Mhm.
last recording, and then a few weeks passed, and I'd completely forgotten. And I asked in the chat, like, "Oh, can you remind me what our films there were?" And you said, Fallen Angels and Chungking Express. And by complete coincidence, about 2, 3 days earlier, I had seen In the Mood for Love for the first time,
Mhm.
because it was recently like I think it was number 2 on the New York Times top 100 films of the 21st century list, and they just shown it at my local cinema, so I went to see that. So that is it. I'm very much a newbie to his films, um, and then it was quite interesting seeing these ones so close to having seen that one for the first time because it does kind of paint like a broader picture. There's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of lines that can be drawn between them. But yeah, that's it. I know very little about the man himself. I know very little about his overall oeuvre other than the big three, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, the big three. I
Mm,
saw the film Happy Together when we were doing queer projections and we
mm,
were working on the curated collection for that. I consider because Happy Together is two gay men living in, I think the entire film, if I remember correctly, takes place in this very tiny apartment. And it's just
mm,
the one gay man stays in the apartment all the time. I think it like takes place in some South American country. It's
mm.
been a long time since I've seen it, but that's besides In the Mood for Love. That's the other one that I've seen. And that one actually is quite very, very different from his style because it's very dark. It's not colorful at all. I don't remember there being any, intense use of color, which is what I associate Wong Kar-wai with, because obviously in the
Mm.
movie Love, those bright, rich reds is really like the hallmark of that movie. So besides In the Mood for Love, I saw In the Mood for Love maybe 5 years ago. Um, and again, like it was just that moment of being so immersed in that. And I wish I would have seen it in the cinema like you did because I
Oh
only
yeah.
saw it in my TV. But being immersed in that red, that rich, rich red, is really was just like really incredible. I don't remember anything about the story, but I just remember that red. I was like, wow, this red.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess those are some of like the hallmarks of his style. That's what I would associate with him is the use of color. Also very unique camera angles and lighting, and I think we saw that much more in Fallen Angels than Chungking.
Mm.
And music. So obviously something that I mean, Happy Together, that's the who sings that? The song Happy Together. But that's like
Is
the
that the
main
Beach Boys?
it's like the
No.
Turtles or something.
Yeah.
Song, Happy Together song.
The Turtles,
No, the
yeah.
Turtles. I was right, man. I just felt like I pulled that out of my ass. Yes,
Wow.
I'm so cultured. Oh my God. But yeah, so obviously Western music, Western pop music is a big hallmark of his work. And that sort of blending of Eastern culture and Western culture. Obviously, he's a director from Hong Kong, and he really came in his own with that handover from Hong Kong, going from Britain back to China, and something that we'll talk a little bit more about in with these particular films because I think that plays a role in the development of these characters.
Mm.
But a lot of his films, obviously, the themes are love, loss, memories, isolation. That's a lot of his style as well. Um, so obviously, this next question, how do you think these two works compared to his other films, doesn't quite work since we've really only seen is In the
Mhm.
Mood for Love. But yeah, like you said, In the Mood for Love, I think is his number one film. Everyone knows him for that film. Uh,
Mm.
and then what because I hadn't seen Fallen Angels or Chungking. I actually because I was just it was just one of those things where I was scrolling trying to find something to watch. And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll watch Chungking because, whatever. That's always a movie that's on all those lists." And so that's how I sort of watched it. And I just like again, just being so immersed in the visual language of his films. I think there's so
Mm.
much embedded in the cinematography, in the use of editing, and the use of color. Um, I will say though, when I was watching Chungking, I feel like I was really stupid because I didn't realize it was two different stories. I thought it was the same. I thought it was the same characters, but like 5 years later or something.
Yeah.
I changed actors. I had no idea that it was two different stories. I was so confused because I was watching it. The first part is he's like so intense about getting this girl back, and he's just like on the phone constantly. I'm like, man, this guy is super hyperactive. And then the police officer character comes in, and I'm like, wow, he's really grown up. He's really mellowed out. I just was so confused.
Well, yeah. There's like weird through lines in terms of like the police and stuff, and obviously Fallen Angels was originally conceived as a third part to Chunking Express that he just decided to um branch out to its own film, and it is quite interesting the kind of different, I guess, perspectives on relationships that are kind of well, and the big thing that really struck me between the two, because I watched Fallen Angels first
Mhm.
and I kind of regret it because in Chunking Express, the first story especially, one of the central motifs is tins of pineapple,
Yeah. Hmm.
and the expired tins of pineapple kind of becomes a recurring motif, almost a metaphor for his relationship and stuff. And then in Fallen Angels, when the one of the main characters is mute, and when he mentions how he became mute, he says as a kid he ate a can of expired pineapples, and that kind of feels like it's almost like a punchline to the setup from
Yeah.
like a movie ago. And but having seen Fallen Angels first, it just really struck me. Just his explanation of like, oh, I ate an expired tin of pineapples. I just kept coming back to that as I was watching it. It just seemed so bizarre, and I thought it was so funny. And then when I watched Chunking, it almost kind of ruined it for me a little bit. Like, oh no, it is part of like a metaphor. I thought it was just a funny little quirk. I thought it
Yeah,
was just
no,
a fun little thing that you threw in.
I watched Chungking first and then Fallen
Mm,
Angels. And I will totally admit, I think Chungking was the far superior film. I enjoyed that one. And
mm,
I think I've been thinking about it, about why I've enjoyed that one more. And I think there was that sort of optimism to it. It was, it's this,
mm,
I think the two films very much represent light and dark. And Wong Kar-wai has talked about that, where Chungking is what happens in Hong Kong during the day, and Fallen Angels is what happens at night. Um,
mm,
and I think it is that lighter, Chungking has a lighter, more whimsical nature to it. And I was rewatching the trailer because it's been a while since I watched it, and I was like, I don't even know if I'm going to remember this movie. But and the one scene that I remember so much was the guy, the cop. He goes as the girl's like moving his room around. He's so completely oblivious to the fact that his apartment has completely changed. And he has this like I think it is it first it's a white polar bear, giant stuffed animal,
mm.
and he's like, talking to the stuffed animal as if like, it's like his therapist or something. He's like venting to the stuffed animal. And then the stuffed animal changes to a striped tiger. And
It's
he's
Garfield, I
talking to
think.
it
Yeah,
as if it's still a white bear. And he's like, look at you. You're so dirty. You're all messed up. You have all these stains over you. Not even realizing that it's a different
it's
stuffed animal because he's just so caught up in his own world that he's not realizing that everything in his apartment's changing. And I just remember like that's so cute and whimsical and funny. And I think that's why I enjoyed Chungking more because it did have those lighter moments.
mm,
Whereas Fallen Angel, I think, had those like kind of silly, goofy moments, but it was so grounded in this bizarre camera angles, these like fisheye angles. It was so dark and grungy that it just didn't have the same appeal. It didn't feel as inviting
mhm.
as I felt Chungking was.
I think I felt the opposite in a way,
Okay.
in that the second half of Chungking was probably my least favorite of the kind of three narratives, in that it's like you said, it was very cute and very
Mhm.
sweet and very kind of it's very like Amelie, just kind of a
Yeah, yeah,
quirky little rom-com situation. But I think I found that quite a bit too twee and a bit too like man I don't want to say manic pixie dream girl, but you know what I
yeah, yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that kind of it's
Mhm.
overly romanticized, particularly with them playing California Dreaming every 8 seconds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But compared to like the first half, which was a guy, trying to desperately get over this girl who broke up with him and kind of going into like almost a weird feverish psychosis, and then meeting a kind of drug dealer, and them kind of having not even like a proper one night stand, just hanging out for a night. And then in the end, the kind of culmination of that whole story is her just sending him just a little happy birthday message, and that being enough for him to go, okay, you know what? Maybe my life's not that bad. And that kind of little moment of hope. And I felt the same way about Fallen Angels, where it was quite heavy and depressing and just no one really getting what they want. But at the very end, they had that motorbike ride, and these
Mhm.
two kind of lost people kind of found each other. And is it ever going to work out in the long term? Is anything going to come of it? Probably not. But it's the little fleeting moments of people kind of finding each other. I found a lot more, I guess, heartwarming than just the straightforward kind of rom-comminess of Chunking second half.
Mhm.
But I guess it speaks to different people in different ways, I guess, in that
Yeah, and
sense.
yeah, I mean, I like that perspective of you viewing that ending scene of Fallen Angels with some more optimism. Because like you said, it is very much with the way the tone of the film, you're assuming that these
Mm,
people, it's not going to last beyond this motorcycle ride back into the city.
mm,
But I guess there is sort of this optimism of because both films are about isolation and being an individual in a massive city, and how everyone's stories are, you're so grounded in your own story, but there's other people around you who are experiencing other things. Um, and I think that is really like that's why all of these stories, the films blend all of these different stories together. It has this sort of
mm.
anthology style to it. Um, I don't remember where I was going with this, but yeah, there is an optimism, I guess, to that ending of Fallen Angels because these people do find each other and they do connect and they have that moment of human connection in this place, especially with Fallen Angels, in this place that seems so seedy and so um separated and violent.
Mm,
And you have that same sort of experience with the hitman, and I guess she is technically a prostitute, Blondie,
mm,
where they have this sort of moment together, and she so desperately wants to keep him around, but that's sort of that's playing into the dark side, I guess, of the same story is he leaves her and walks out on his own and continues his sort of own self-isolation. Um, Yeah, I think that the duality between the two stories and that light and dark is so dramatic. I mean, I don't want to say it's so dramatically obvious, but it's so when you really sit
yeah.
and think about it. I mean, the characters in Chungking, a police officer is the main character. The main character in Fallen Angels is a cop. I mean, it's so dramatic. This light versus dark, good versus evil. But both of the films are telling the same type of stories. Just because one people work during the day doesn't mean their life is dramatically different from the people who work at
Mm.
night. Um,
And even just the general aesthetics of the film, like when I think of Chunking Express, the first color I think of is kind of like orange. I think of the
yeah,
girl's
yellow.
hair and
Mhm.
the kind of yellow and the poster and just the light and the sunlight, whereas Fallen Angels is very much a dark green. Again, very much the poster and just it's all shot at night. It's all I don't yeah, I'm not sure if there's a single daytime shot in that movie. And I think that's really interesting, the kind of because I don't think I'd really associated the kind of um thematic and moral light and darkness with both that kind of stands out. They are a very interesting contrast in that way.
Mhm. Do
Mm.
you think, because like you said earlier, this was supposed to all be one film. Do you think they work better as separate films, or do you think that they would have worked better as one big longer film?
I, I think I haven't really thought about it. My gut instinct is that Fallen Angels I think does work as
Mhm.
one-off film. I do feel that Chunking is slightly missing something
Mhm.
without that contrast because like you say it's very positive. I guess it makes a better kind of romantic comedy in that sense. But I think the full thematic thread between the two films feels a little bit incomplete by the end of Chunking. But I guess I only really feel that way because I've seen both, so I feel like I'm seeing the bigger picture that
Mhm.
could be there. Whereas if I'd seen Chunking Express when it came out at the time, not knowing about a spiritual successor, then perhaps I would feel a lot more like it is, fine on its own, it's complete.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I think I agree with you about Chungking not feeling final. And I think the reason, I don't even remember if I actually said this in the recording or not, if I said it before we started recording. The reason why I think I was so confused about the fact that the pineapple kid, I thought the pineapple kid and the police officer were the same people. So I
mm,
was so confused because the whole movie I'm like sitting there thinking like, oh, he did get his girlfriend back. I was so confused about it. But I think that maybe that's why, and I think I enjoyed that the main storyline with the cop and the girl that sneaks into his apartment more because that felt like a full
mm,
story and that kind of took up
yeah,
a huge part, like maybe like over an hour of the film. So I felt like it had more emphasis because I kind of felt like that was its own story. But then when you just have that sort of part in the beginning, it's kind of like it's hard to make sense of what it is. But then when you watch Fallen Angels I feel like he blended the different stories better in Fallen Angels. I think
mm,
the intercutting of the guy that sneaks into people's shops and all the different storylines with the hitman storyline made it I felt like you could understand it better that it was an anthology, it was these different stories. Whereas just having the first part of Chungking being the pineapple kid and then the second part being the cop kid, it was for me anyway, it
yeah.
was harder to understand what was going on.
One bit I've thought about quite a lot since is like at the opening of Chunking Express, it's him, the policeman's chasing down a criminal,
Mhm.
and he passes by. the drug dealer lady, and it kind of freeze frames on her, and it makes a comment about like, oh, we missed each other by 0.01 centimeters. I very quickly will fall in love with this woman, and that's kind of the start of the narrative. And then it rounds it off with him passing the woman from the second half of Chungking Express, and he says again, "I missed this person by 0.01 centimeters. I'm never going to see her again." And I guess that's the kind of idea that's really played with, I guess, throughout both Chungking and even more so in Fallen Angels, perhaps, about kind of these near misses of people, how you never know who's going to impact who in what way, and who's just going to vanish, and who's going to do this and that. And he meets his old acquaintance on the bus and gets invited to the wedding, and he almost goes, and then he doesn't. And it's these kinds of little moments in life that could lead to something and might not, which I guess is kind of an idea he also plays with in the Mood for Love a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of, I guess, being the entire focus of the film is this one kind of will they won't they near miss over.
And I think that's why, I mean, when I was looking up, like researching this, there's a lot, Wong Kar-wai has spoken a lot about Hong Kong
Mm,
city itself being this connecting between the two films. Because obviously all of the stories are in their own little path, they're all doing their own thing. But the reoccurring thing that connects these two stories is Hong Kong. Um, yeah, and I think that that's what makes these two works. I mean, we've talked about the light and the dark and the what happens in the city during the day versus what happens in the city at night. But like you said, the real point of the story is all of these people are experiencing the same sort of near misses of human connection. Um,
mm,
all of the characters are in some way isolated or they want something more. They're acting out because they want to have this connection with someone, like the girl that goes into his apartment and cleans everything up. I mean, in both stories, they're so obsessed with the people who live there, but they won't say anything to the actual people. They won't allow themselves to have this connection. Uh,
mm,
and Hong Kong sort of plays this role within the historical context of what was happening in Hong Kong at this time. It was Britain had control over Hong Kong, and at this moment, it was in the negotiations of giving it back to China. So there's sort of this duality of are we Westerners? Are we Chinese? Are, what is Hong Kong? No one quite has an identity because everyone's, this country itself is, or the city in itself is so lost in its identity. And that sort of is reflected also in the characters, um, which, I think that's really why these films are so pivotal and why Wong Kar-wai is such, this is what put him on the map was because of what he was saying within that context of nationality, identity, who are you? Are we where we live? Are we our own individual people? How, does a city allow us to connect? Does it allow us to be separated? I mean, I don't know. Um,
mm.
but I think that considering Hong Kong as the main character of the story is really interesting. Um, and in this place where, I mean, it's particularly this Chungking, which is where both of the films take place, is a seedy part of town. It's not a nice part of town. It's not the built up British side of the town. Um, and you see that in both of the films, that it is still grungy and gritty, even in the light. And there's a lot of crime. That's why we follow the police officers. Um, yeah, I don't know if that is going anywhere, but that was just
Mm.
an observation I had.
I found it really interesting how the first half of Chungking Express, and so the first kind of third of this whole narrative about, as you say, kind of about Hong Kong, is centered around the Indian district of
Mm,
Hong Kong. And it's like, other than the main characters, most of the kind of extras and people you see walking
yeah,
around are
you're right.
Indian.
Hmm.
And to the point that part of me did want, because there's the scene at an airport, and I did wonder at a certain point, like, has she gone somewhere else? And it was only like when a group of Indian men started chasing her through a subway, and I saw like Chinese posters, I was like, no, okay, they are still in Hong Kong. And maybe that's on me for making assumptions,
No, no,
but
no. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that he chooses to start this conversation about
Hmm.
Hong Kong and its people and the diversity and stuff like you said, in an area that almost seems very un-Chinese, I guess, in its aesthetics and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting. Because I didn't even think about that, but you're right. Is the restaurant where that girl works, is it an Indian restaurant?
uh,
I can't
no,
remember.
I don't think so. She does go to an Indian restaurant because she kidnaps a little girl at one point.
Oh, that's right.
Um,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah, so I think she goes to one. She spends a lot of time there, but I don't think they work at like an Indian place.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
but
that's really
yeah.
interesting because I didn't even clock that. But yeah, you're so totally right because and then of course you have this obviously there's no white characters as
Mm,
the main, within the main characters, but you have this pop music that is very, I mean, in California Dreaming and Chungking,
mm,
um, in I don't remember what the songs were in Fallen Angels, but this use of Western pop music is so prevalent, which that adds the white man into the story as well,
mm.
and like the idea of California, and of America. Um,
And so many characters. I swear it happens in both Fallen Angels and in Chungking. There's a woman who randomly vanishes from the
oh,
main character's life, and she
oh yeah, yeah,
ends up being an air hostess. She
yeah.
gets a job as an air hostess, and the first half of Chungking, she goes to the airport with the idea of airports and kind of, I guess, just leaving Hong
Hmm.
Kong. Um, is such like a constant presence throughout. Like it seems that everyone just kind of wants to leave, or at least
Hmm.
all the female characters do.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, it's just an interesting kind of parallel that I hadn't really thought about. But it is interesting how many air hostesses there seem to be within the main
Yeah.
cast.
Hmm.
Um,
So you talked a little bit about the pineapples and these sort of shared threads between Fallen Angels and Chungking. Um, so Fallen Angels has been described as a really important postmodern film. So for those who don't know, postmodern is sort of a work of art that references culture, art, and society of that sort of time. Um, it's sort of Fallen Angels has really been defined as one of like the most influential postmodern films that has been made. Um, and of course, you get these sort of references from Chungking being the original film, and Fallen Angel sort of references back to that original that film that it's from. They have shared spaces, they have similar storylines, they have shared objects, such as the tinned pineapple. But you also have this atmosphere of Hong Kong, so you can sense the anxiety and the uncertainty of the place, and what will happen when it's given back to China. Sort of all these things that we've talked about really grounds and makes us understand it as a postmodern film. Um, do you have anything else that you want to talk about in terms of the postmodern nature of Fallen Angels? I just thought that was really interesting, something to reference
mm,
to the listeners.
I'm not sure I do in terms of the themes and stuff. I was very struck by both films, and I mean he does it in the movie for Love Again. Like the use of like slow motion and like time and how much like along with like the camera angles and stuff you mentioned, there's like blurring, and because I
Yeah.
think it was filmed on like digital cameras, a lot of them, and you can kind of really see that kind of, and I guess that's something quite postmodern is the that style of recording with handheld camcorders and stuff, gives it a really specific kind of aesthetic to a certain time period, because that was kind of, looking back on it now, quite a small decade window where that was
Mhm.
kind of a predominant form of recording before we got kind of more HD, and now people use their phones and stuff. And I'm sure people eventually will look back on iPhone recorded stuff similarly, but that gave it a real kind of time and place in a
Mhm.
sense.
I remember
Um,
what I was going to say about postmodernism. Um,
mm,
our last episode, I think it was, no, 2 episodes ago, we talked about David Lynch and Mulholland Drive. I would consider David Lynch a huge postmodern director.
Mm.
And we talked a little bit in that episode about these sort of reoccurring ideas and these same reoccurring characters that appear in Lynch's films. The club scenes, these musical interludes. I think one of the big ones that we talked about was Laura Palmer appears in the club scene in Mulholland Drive. She's in the background of the theater. Um, do you enjoy that type of storytelling? Do you think it takes you out of a story? Do you like when a film references itself and is sort of aware of where it is? Do you think it makes it not do you feel like you have to know the other films before you can fully understand this one, or you have to understand, you can't look back on it because it's so grounded in this particular time and place, and then if you don't know that particular time and place, it doesn't feel like it has as much impact.
I personally love that. I love an auteur. Like, or auteurism is kind of bullshit, but also like it's good fun. I did my dissertation on like Werner Herzog and his kind of thematic and visual, and just the through lines throughout his work. And I do really feel that it sometimes it can be a bit much, certainly. But I think in most cases I've found films kind of films like that, they work in their on their own in isolation, but it feels almost rewarding to kind of go through and start recognizing this pattern, and it kind of becomes something of a codex almost to kind of, I feel, understanding films on a deeper level in that sense once you can start to recognize the parallels and the through lines. And on occasion I think it happened with Herzog a few times where he would throw in like an offhand comment or something, and you'd recognize, oh, that links back to this thing from this other film, and then that metaphor that was centered around suddenly carries across. Um, but yeah, no, and I do think that is a very rewarding thing. Um, that helps with a wider understanding of the films, kind of as I guess as a work of art. But of course, it is, I guess, a very case by case basis. I'm sure there's some filmmakers who try that sort of thing, and it just kind of falls flat because suddenly, I mean, it becomes like a Marvel movie where you
Yeah.
can't watch it without doing 20 hours of homework beforehand. Um,
Yeah.
but
No,
I
I
think in
mean,
my experiences, yeah,
yeah,
people
I
like Lynch and Kar-wai, they're able to avoid that. They're able to kind of make the products in and of themselves.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
totally agree with you. And I think that case in point, you had seen Fallen Angels before you saw Chungking. So you were still able to enjoy Fallen Angels, even though technically within the narrative, it comes after Chungking. Um, so I think, that's perfect case in point to say that Wong Kar-wai he how easily he creates this sort of narrative that is still enjoyable in its own right. And I think obviously with David Lynch, it's the same way. Um, still you can still enjoy the film, but it's an elevated experience when you actually begin to appreciate the symbolism and what it is that it's saying outside of itself. Uh,
mm,
I personally love postmodern work. I think that, I mean, I'm really into contemporary art, so um, I think that's what makes it so exciting is that yes, you can experience it for what it is, just a simple narrative, a simple film. You can appreciate, the use of the fisheye lens and the interesting editing. But I think it kind of plays on this idea of the Easter egg, which I think,
mhm,
that is such like a cliche term because now everyone, because of Taylor Swift, everyone thinks everything's an Easter egg. It's not an Easter egg. It's
mhm,
like part of the art. Like, it's just like it
mhm,
drives me kind of crazy. But everyone, this is how they consider it. It's called an Easter egg, right? So the Easter egg is the pineapple. That's what's going to connect the tin pineapple. It connects the two stories. But you know, so it's fun to find those references and it sort of makes it you can have a little chuckle to yourself because you remember the pineapple from the first movie, and then and I remember when I was watching Fallen Angels, I was like, oh my God, here we go with these pineapples again. Like it's just like 20 minutes about these pineapples and chunking. So I was just like, I think it makes you appreciate and it allows you to return to a work as well. It allows you to watch the work for the first time, enjoy it for what it is, and then once you sort of maybe grow up, you learn more, you experience life differently, you can return to the work and kind of reflect on it differently because it has a different meaning to you. It makes it the work is constantly evolving with you in your life, and how you have changed. And I think that's what makes it really exciting. Whereas, you know, something like a costume drama, it is what it is, right? Like,
Mm,
it's going to tell a very linear story, very narrative story that doesn't have perhaps as much excitement. And like you said, like a Marvel movie, they try to do these postmodern things. They try to, but here we go with the Easter eggs, quote unquote. But it doesn't, I don't think it's used as effectively and it's not as interesting and it's kind of a failed attempt at doing something. Um, so do you have anything else that you want to talk about with these two films?
um, nothing springs to mind particularly. So I'm just looking through the questions you wrote.
The only other thing
Um,
that we didn't talk about that I thought was interesting, I mean, we might not
hmm,
have anything else to say about it, but again, the duality between the light and the dark is, I thought the camera angles, the fisheye lens that kind of like allowed you to see all the space around the characters, and it really
hmm,
drove home that idea of the isolation because the way that the fisheye works is that everything around it is sort of skewed and it looks very abnormal and the characters in the center of the lens and they're sort of like blown up. And so it kind of emphasizes their isolation because you can see everything around them. It sort of puts them in the foreground of the shot, but there's nothing else around them. There's nothing to it shows how kind of little their world is because they have nothing to live for, I guess. And I thought that was really
yeah.
interesting, the use of the fisheye.
One thing I've just thought now, and this could be complete no nonsense. But you talking about the fisheye lens just then kind of made me think about like the overall aesthetics of the work in that, there's lots of the stuff like slow motion and weird speeding up, and there's these weird lenses where you can see all around people, and there's and a lot of kind of like blurred movement and sudden freeze frames and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And the two films that suddenly just very much came to mind for me were Run Lola Run and Train Spotting,
Mhm.
which were kind of made at a similar time
Yeah.
and kind of, I guess, tap into very similar vibes, if not necessarily themes in a lot of ways, and kind of I think, do share a lot of kind of, and are very postmodern works in that
Mhm.
sense. And I do think it's quite interesting that there was kind of this aesthetic that was, I guess, somewhat global, like kind of late 90s grungy kind of filmmaking. I'm sure there's better examples than those three, but I guess I hadn't really kind of thought of the film outside of itself in that sense. And it is quite interesting how almost global. But then I guess, these films, as you said, many times, they're very Western in a lot of their um aesthetics and nature and narratives. And
Yeah, it makes you wonder now that you said that if that was intentional. I mean, I will say my knowledge of Asian cinema is not very strong.
mm,
Um, but it makes you wonder if Wong Kar-wai was playing more on the Western aesthetics of that time of the 90s, or if
mm,
it was something that was also kind of happening. I think because now I think like we think of Japanese cinema being and like anime and all of that being very, I think, ahead of its time compared to what Westerners are doing with like animation and all of that.
mm,
So it makes you wonder, was the Chinese cinema at the time, did it have that sort of same aesthetic? Is that what made put Wong Kar-wai on the map was because he was bringing this new aesthetic to China and to a Chinese art audience? Um, but yeah, like all you have to do is reference our Brat curated collection, Brat, but
hmm.
it's definitely not because it's I don't even know what the title is. Brat, but it's literally not because it's just the Bratty movie collection. I think 90% of the movies we put in that were from the 90s because they just embrace that grunge sort of bratty aesthetic. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, Train Spotting. We didn't even think about Train Spotting for the Brat collection. Jeez, what's wrong with
Yeah.
us? Run, Lola Run is in there though.
That is that one. I wrote that one myself, so
Yes. Will came up with that one
makes
all
me
on his
feel
own.
ah.
Um, but yeah, that's a lot of interesting things. I mean, I don't know a lot about Wong Kar-wai, and that's I think like the BFI for so many years, I just felt like for a period of time, the BFI every single season that they did was a Wong Kar-wai season. That's the only reason why I knew his name was because the BFI was always doing Wong Kar-wai seasons. Um, and so that's why I ended up watching In the Mood for Love for the first time. But um, yeah, I don't know a lot about like his background and what he did in terms of his early work and how it influenced the cinema of. I know it was influential for Chinese cinema, but I don't know much about China at the time, what the aesthetics were that was going on. But it does
Hmm.
again draw in an interesting parallel between Eastern and Western. I mean, light and dark, East and West. Interesting. Hopefully, you enjoyed this episode of Film East Chats. To learn more about Film East and our film criticism publications, upcoming events, and unique activities, visit our website, film-east.com, or follow us on any of our social media at films with an S _ East. Make sure you're subscribed to Film East Chats anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube, so you never miss one of our deep dives into films and TV. Again, we're Film East, a global film organization. Catch you next time.